From Washington, the McLaughlin Group, the American original. For over 3 decades, the sharpest minds, best sources, hardest talk.
Thanks for joining the McLaughlin Group, a show where friends disagree agreeably. I'm your host, Tom Rogan. This week's panelists are author and columnist Pat Buchanan, the Daily Beast's Eleanor Clift, the Chicago Tribune's Clarence Page, and Saga and Jetty of The Hill. Okay, Pat, sorry to see you go.
Late Congressman Walter Jones of North Carolina, who had been a pro-war congressman and then turned against it. And what he did was families of every kid killed in that war, he wrote personal letters to him. One of the most respected men on the Hill in either party.
Talking about the Vietnam War.
No, I'm talking about the Iraq War.
The Iraq War. Okay, Eleanor.
I would agree with Pat. Walter Jones was one of the few people to stand up to his party, and I had some very good dealings with him over the years, so he is a loss. I would also add to that Will Hurd, the Texas Republican congressman who's not going to run again, the only African American in the House Republican caucus, and he also was willing to occasionally stand up to his party.
Saga.
The person I'm sad to see go is actually Michael Flynn into his plea agreement. I think he was very unfairly treated throughout this investigation. I think a lot of the things that we've seen have really vindicated some of the claims that he's made about how he's unfairly targeted. And I'm sorry to see him fade from national politics after a career that he's had.
Do you think that he will receive any prison time in his sentence in the plea agreement?
I do think he's going to receive some prison time. Whether that ultimately ends up serving that, we're not going to be. We're not so sure
President
about that.
Trump, you would think, might have good reason now, with the excuse, at least, of the Horowitz report.
Yeah.
With the reason of the Horowitz
to give him a
report.
little pardon.
Not
you think
an
a pardon?
Yeah,
excuse.
not the excuse.
Not an excuse, a reason.
The reason. Okay, sorry, Patrick. All right, Clarence.
Brookings found an 80% turnover in President Trump's A-team and cabinet picks, but since he only picks the best people, I'm sure it's all getting better.
So you're sorry to see those people go?
Absolutely.
Okay. My sorry to see you go will be the unnamed CIA officers who died in the service of their country. Whatever you think of politics, whatever, they die in some difficult situations, and we should pay homage to them. Most honest, Pat.
Bill Barr, Attorney General of the United States, taken horrible beatings here in D.C., as you might expect if you're courageous and stand up for his views. Outstanding speeches at Notre Dame and at the Federalist Society, and a generally impressive man.
Okay, Eleanor.
He's very honest about the fact that he'll do anything to protect President Trump and won't really do his job as the Attorney
Merry
General.
Christmas
I'll grant
to
you
you,
that. My most honest was Greta Thunberg, who the young global activist who dared to shame the leaders at the United Nations and who's speaking for her generation to force political leaders to finally take action on saving the planet.
Well, let's talk about Greta Thunberg for a couple of minutes here. Saga, what's your read on her?
Well, I mean, I don't question her sincerity whatsoever. I do think she's obviously being propped up by the media. She's very much a media creation. And a lot of it is about practicality in the way that we talk about climate, which is that one of the things you never hear from for Greta Thunberg and a lot of her fans, really, in the media, is that China is the largest emitter on this planet. We never talk about China in the context of global emissions. We never talk about...
They're working on it.
But they're not really working on it, right?
They're going to choke to death in Beijing, believe me.
Well, sure. I mean, they have some pollution standards, but that doesn't mean that they're not the
carbon.
largest emitters, by far. And really, if we're really serious about this, we would be talking about it from an internationalist perspective, admitting that the Paris Climate Accords was nothing more than really just, a window dressing on woke performatism whenever it comes to this. So the way I look at Greta Thunberg is really just being used by a media which doesn't know very much about climate and which is buying into so much of the alarmism.
What an artful way to squelch a young woman as a media creation. She stepped onto the stage. The media didn't have to cover her.
Sure.
She speaks for people her age, and they will inherit the planet. She has every right to say everything that she is saying, and it's up to her elders to figure out how to confront an existential threat to this planet, and I hope they will.
I commend any teenage activism. I was one myself. What it is upon the adults who are using and imposing, making the young generation of this country feel that they're truly going to die in 10 years. I think that's terrible. And it's a complete misunderstanding of actual science and the way that this works.
You're most honest then.
My most honest, unexpectedly, Bernie Sanders, because you know why? He came out and he said, "Yeah, taxes are going to go up for Medicare for all." So at least he said it out loud.
Okay.
Yeah.
Clarence.
I'll take care of Bernie Sanders and raise your AOC.
Yeah.
So
Right.
no, I think that's Bernie's very honest as far as these issues go. That's why he's not going to win. But he's been able to push the whole debate by simply people are refreshed by his candor.
Okay. All right. Going back to the China thing, China opening a lot of coal plants that might not help reduce their emissions. Yeah. My most honest is going to be Boris Johnson, because as much as he has perhaps not been so honest for some of his political career, he said he was running on a Brexit thing. He seems to be going to do that, and that's a pretty big deal. Greatest domestic challenge in 2020, Pat?
Get it done. That's exactly right. I think the greatest domestic challenge is going to be keeping this economy, which is really booming right now, unemployment and stock market and all the rest of it, keep it booming through this coming year when the rest of the world isn't doing all that well.
Okay, Eleanor.
Greatest domestic challenge, making sure President Trump is a one-term president.
Okay, okay.
Easy.
But it's interesting that you do say that's a challenge. I mean, you think it'll be a tight race.
Of course it's a challenge, because of the Electoral College. The Democrats could rack up 3 to 5 million to 7 million surplus votes in California, New York, and the blue states, and still narrowly lose in those 3 states that gave the president his win in 2016.
Okay, Saga, greatest domestic.
It's going to be increasing economic concentration on the coast, deindustrialization, and cultural separation. That's going to be our biggest challenge in 2020, and it's going to lead to a raucous election for our lifetime.
Okay.
Healthcare costs, they're still going up and still trying to get a lid, get some controls on it. They're very difficult with the cobbled together healthcare system that we have right now and funding system.
Okay, my greatest domestic challenge will be the continuing growth of the deficit, national debt. At some point, interest rates are going to spike. The markets are going to force a reaction, but more debt eventually has to be paid off. So that's mine. Greatest foreign challenge in 2020, Pat?
Avoiding a war with North Korea or Iran. The North Koreans look like they're heating it up, testing missiles again, and look like they want to go back to the old confrontation pose. As for the Iranians, they're in desperate straits. They got riots all over their country, and I think they're very likely to consider the possibility of doing what they allegedly did in Saudi Arabia, which is strike out again and see if the Americans are going to react, send a message. Look, if you keep choking us to death, we're going to have to fight as the Japanese did in 1941.
Eleanor.
Foreign interference, mainly from Russia in the presidential election, and the rebirth of ISIS in the Middle East.
Okay, good. Saga.
Chinese economic warfare on the United States. They're very upset about the President Trump. They have this new trade deal, but I have no doubt that they are going to try and fluctuate and mess with our markets as much as they possibly can in the election in order to defeat President Trump, because they know he's the worst thing that's ever happened to them.
And do you think that will be something President Trump will sell on the campaign trail? Look, I am China's worst nightmare?
I think it would be the best thing for him to sell, especially if you're going up against somebody like Joe Biden, who's minimized the Chinese threat.
Eleanor, you laugh.
Yeah.
You disagree with that?
I think overly creating China to make them the big enemy that this president is vanquishing. Look at the first stage of the trade deal he got. It's a big nothing. So
well, it's
stage one. I'm sure stage 2 and stage 3 will be magnificent.
If it's not, you'll hear me criticize it. Yeah.
I don't see this president being a match actually for the Chinese.
Okay.
Well, I'm not sure Joe Biden is either. But.
Okay. Well, Clarence, your greatest foreign policy challenge.
Yeah, finding a way out of Afghanistan. The release of the Afghan papers are devastating for anybody who remembers the Pentagon Papers. It's the same damn thing. We're still being lied to, and through Republican and Democratic administrations, it doesn't matter. And we still don't know how to get the heck out of there. It's this quagmire War 3.
But that is the problem, isn't it? That if you withdraw, then you potentially of a safe haven for terrorists and a collapse.
Oh yeah, which is what happened before when we left Afghanistan
sort of a catch-
after the Russians left. You know, I mean, this is really like Vietnam in that sense of this is the kind of quagmire we didn't want to have again, and we've got it.
Okay, my greatest foreign challenge for 2020 will be North Korea. Look what they're doing right now. Okay, moving on. Democratic nominee in 2020, Pat.
It'll be a socialist from New England.
And that must be Elizabeth Warren. Okay.
Wait a minute,
No,
Bernie's from
choose
New
A or
England.
Also from
choose
New
B.
England.
Oh, okay. I still think of Bernie is from Brooklyn.
Choose, as Eleanor says, choose A or B.
Okay. All right, good. Eleanor, yours.
Joseph R. Biden.
Joe Biden as well. He's just got too much strength.
Resilient Joe, and he's got what the people want.
So let's broach into this a little bit before I get to mine. What could bring Joe Biden down? I mean, what beyond a sort of major scandal?
Defeats in Iowa and New Hampshire both. The momentum is a tremendous factor in these early primaries, and you can go boom, just drop down. I mean, look what happened to Howard Dean.
That's
He was
true.
rolling
Don't
out
forget
there
South
and
Carolina,
gone.
though.
That's
Yeah,
exactly
it's a
right.
South
little-
Carolina, that's
And
the question.
Nevada.
Can it bring him back?
Well,
Yeah.
first of all, he's doing pretty well in Iowa and New Hampshire right now. And secondly, Iowa and New Hampshire are two of the whitest states in the country. As long as Joe Biden has the support of the African American community, which is the core of the Democratic Party, he's going to do well. And if he wins Iowa, he doesn't have to win
he
New
wins
Hampshire. If he
Iowa,
wins
he
Iowa,
wins.
he's
He
got the
wins it.
nomination.
I completely agree with Eleanor. I think even if he loses Iowa, that as long as he retains, there's no Barack Obama in
Right.
waiting in order to take that African American support in South Carolina and in a lot of these Super Tuesday states. He's just got such rock solid support there, especially amongst older African American voters, that strength is just, it's so difficult to penetrate that I think that's why he has to be the nominee.
Clarence, you agree?
I agree. Black
Yeah.
women are going to save us again.
Right.
we will see. No, this is momentum is important. He's got to score well in the early states, partly because Bloomberg is waiting as well down the road in Super Tuesday, and that's going to be that's the same lane. That's the same constituency.
He's the insurance policy in case Biden doesn't make
Pat,
it.
as someone who's run a few presidential campaigns, if you were advising Senator Warren, what would you be telling her to do now?
Go hard out in Iowa and New Hampshire, go all out. If you win those two states, that's the one chance you've got of really dropping the bottom out of Biden and maybe going down to South Carolina and doing well, or making it through Super Tuesday. And that's the same what I would recommend to Bernie. You know, when I ran myself, we fell behind Dole by 3 in Iowa, beat him in New Hampshire. You had to beat him twice, and we didn't do it.
Okay. My choice of the Democratic nominee will be Joe Biden for many of the reasons just uttered. Okay. The biggest story in 2020, Pat.
Trump is acquitted. Trump is renominated. Trump is reelected. Trump is Person of the Year, despite what Greta Thunberg says.
And Trump is going to tell us about the UFOs, I hope, as well. Eleanor.
Oh, yes.
Trump will be the new 5-letter word. I don't know. Obviously, the results of the 2020 election, whichever party it goes to. And then I would also add escalating damage from climate change.
Okay, Saga.
I'm with Pat. All three. It's the 2020 election. It'll be the acquittal of Donald Trump, the redemption of Donald Trump, and the re-election of
You
Donald
think
Trump.
he's going to win?
I do. Currently, with the Democratic field, I just don't see any path forward.
And
for
does
that.
he walk on
Yeah.
water and ascend to the heavens too?
I've criticized him
He's
plenty.
he's the chosen one.
I look at him and I see somebody relatively unbeatable in a lot of these 6 swing states the Democrats need to carry, especially with Joe Biden is the person who could come closest, but he just doesn't have what it takes in order to get it done.
Why is that?
I mean, I really do mean it's just his old policies that are really is what led to the deindustrialization and the flipping of many of these states. People are not want neoliberalism 2.0 whenever it comes to this new election, and Trump at the very least is trying or talking about trying to do something about this manufacturing base.
He hasn't brought back coal. He
haven't heard-
hasn't brought back manufacturing.
And if Biden talked
he
about
is
that, maybe
underwater
he'd do
in
well,
all of
but-
those
Yeah.
key states.
Gas is going great guns.
He's going great guns. That's right.
Okay, Clarence.
Well, I've taken my Biden filters off my glasses, and I see Trump's vulnerabilities, and he has many. He's had the lowest polling of a president polling history. And remarkable, considering how well the economy is doing right now. If the economy does take a dip this coming year, then he's going to be in serious trouble because that is his issue. That's what's left for him. And he also is he has the potential for numerous surprises down the road here. So
do you agree, Clarence, with Saga's prediction earlier that China will attempt to impose economic pain on the United States for that very same reason that you mentioned there, that it would damage prospectively President Trump's re-election prospects?
Depends on what China wants. You know, we don't think the same way the Chinese. The Chinese think long term, and what their long term agenda is what needs to be served. Right now, they see some utility in improving, or stabilizing their economy at present because it's been through some rocky times. But in the long run, they can deal with any U.S. president on the horizon.
Tom, they better watch sticking it to Trump on, say, the farm goods and the rest of it in the fall. He could get reelected, and he's a fellow that remembers who did what to him.
Okay. I think the biggest story in 2020 will be, of course, the election, but also the economy's role in that, and North Korea. Again, the potential there for something very bad is very serious and very high, I think. Most overrated story in 2020. What do you think is going to be an overrated story in 2020?
It's overrated already, climate change.
Okay.
Look, I mean, we've got it everywhere. It's constant. Get over it. We've got the message and the rest of it. But when governments try to do something in Chile, they raise gasoline prices, or they do in Paris and the rest of it, you get riots. People are not going to turn the world economy over to these folks.
Eleanor.
We've got to confront climate change.
It's
the life of the planet. You can smirk about it all you like, but Pat, your generation will not be around to experience the worst of it.
What about your generation?
And I'm the same generation. I'm not going to be around, but I care about future generations. And secondly, you don't have to impose the draconian things the way you phrase it. You can deal with climate change in a creative way. There are jobs connected with it. I'm not going to go into all of that, but the candidates are going to deal with that, and the next president will get a handle on this. It's the #1 issue facing the country. But the overrated story in 2020, I think, is going to be the Senate impeachment trial. By the time the votes take place on November 2020, it will be like number 10 on the scandals attached to President Trump.
Okay, Saga.
I actually agree with Eleanor. I think it's going to be the Senate trial. I also think it's going to be Mayor Pete Buttigieg, probably, obviously the most overrated story of the 2020 election. Disproportionate amount of media coverage relative to an actual record, and just somebody who's, is not a serious candidate given his polling with African American voters.
Do you think part of that is because the media, he's charismatic, well-spoken, he's gay. There are these sort of new factors that
he's everything that they were trained to believe in, which is that he is this McKinsey graduate, Rhodes Scholar, face of the meritocracy, Harvard graduate. I mean, he's this this poster child for like neoliberalism. Really, I keep saying it, and that is a system which they benefit greatly from, which they want to see perpetuated, and that's why he's so overrated.
But I thought the whole thrust of his campaign is to reform everything and change everything, not to perpetuate whatever you mean by neoliberalism. He says
change, but what does he actually want to do?
Clarence's most overrated story.
I've got some great oceanfront property to sell you, by the way, Pat, both in South Florida and in California, where people, and on Newport News, Virginia, where people are making changes now, spending a lot of money to prepare.
Most overrated, sorry to push you.
I'm just going to go with the Peloton ad.
All right, the Peloton will return. All right.
Most overrated, people who dismiss climate change.
Okay.
How about that?
All right, my most overrated story in 2020 is going to be the degree to which bots will be told that if President Trump wins, bots from the Russians will win the election. The key with the Russian aggression is where they're messing around in internal systems, deep fake, stuff like that, and we should punish them for it if they do it, which they will. Destined for political stardom in 2020, Pat.
Lindsey Graham will star in the Senate impeachment trial of Donald Trump. Okay. I think he's the most articulate individual on the subject up there right now, and he's got an opportunity where the whole country's going to be watching. My guess is he's going to be the lead pony.
Eleanor.
I say the Republican senators, if there are any, who vote to convict the president.
Do you think there will be any?
I think there could be 3 or 4.
Give us one name that you think might.
Well,
Try Mitt.
I would try Mitt, exactly. Not necessarily a courageous figure, but he has nothing to lose, and yes, he would be one. And Susan Collins and the people who are in tight elections. Okay. It's possible, and if you got, 3 or 4, you could say that the majority of the Senate voted to remove him from office. That's not an insignificant conclusion.
Okay, Saga.
I think Lindsey Graham in the beginning, but I actually want to highlight Senator Josh Hawley. I think he's one of these people, one of these new politicians to come to Washington, really has advanced intellectual populism. And ultimately, I think, as we said earlier, impeachment is going to be a forgotten story in the first 2 months of January. It's going to be about who can harness the populist economic forces in the country and really move forward in that direction. So from my side, I think Senator Josh Hawley is absolutely the one who's poised to do that. Okay,
good one to look for there. Clarence, yours.
I think whoever gets picked to be the running mate of the Democratic nominee is going to be a big story. And I got to think of several names, but I hate to make any predictions about next year's election.
Okay. I'm going to say, and I'll probably get some scowls here, but I'm going to say Nikki Haley will be destined for political stardom in 2020. Not necessarily as a future presidential candidate, but getting out on the campaign trail to try and appeal to some of those suburban female voters that Republicans lost in the midterm elections and really need, I think, in 2020. Okay, destined for political oblivion, Pat.
Bibi Netanyahu. He's got a third election coming up. He's probably going to split the vote with the blue and white party, but I can't see him continuing on as prime minister. He's facing this indictment, facing trial. He's had 9 lives, but I think he's used them all up now.
The former Syra McCall officer, well, actually operator, he's in trouble. Eleanor, yours.
Well, I had Rudy Giuliani, but I don't know that he's going to go away.
Okay.
He can't resist the spotlight, and he's helping, he's helping to dig Trump's grave in many ways politically by revealing that what he did was at the president's direction, and that really he wanted Marie Yovanovitch out because she was going to block investigations into corruption. So he is the gift that keeps on giving. So my new oblivion candidate is Boeing's MAX 737, which they claim they're just suspending the production line. Nobody's ever going to fly that thing again, and it's an absolute outrage that they knew there were problems and hundreds of people died as a result.
Saga.
I return to Mayor Pete Buttigieg for political oblivion.
Okay. All right. That was predictable. All right, Clarence.
Marianne Williamson, but she'll still hit the bestseller list.
Okay. Do you agree with that, Eleanor, Marianne Williamson?
I don't, well, she may be destined for political oblivion, but you're right. Book oblivion and self-help advice, she's still big.
Hope of the new age.
Okay, my destined for political oblivion, and I'll see what Pat thinks about this, is going to be not Jeremy Corbyn, not John McDonnell, but Emmanuel Macron. I think the protests, I'm sad to say that, I think the pension reforms are necessary, but I think the French are showing...
He's still got a couple of years left.
I know, but I think his fate will be sealed in the same way of Hollande and Sarkozy.
See,
early on.
He raised those taxes, Eleanor, on
there
global
are other
warming.
Ways. There are other ways to confront global warming than digging into the pockets of the working people.
I also think as much as President Macron needs to do that pension reform, France does need that, his economic policies, the lethargic growth, gives him an absent insulator.
56% of their GDP they spend,
right.
They tax 48 or something.
Right.
It's just overwhelming.
Macro prediction, Pat.
I think China's going to go through the same kind of crisis the USSR did in its terminal phase. I don't think it may necessarily come this year, but communism simply doesn't work. And the Communist Party is going to one day not perform well, and the people are going to ask, why can't we have an alternative?
Okay, Eleanor.
Nuclear power is making a comeback. You have people like Bill Gates investing in plants because it's the only way to save the planet from death by carbon. Nuclear power has risks. The new generation of plants are safer, but in the balancing of risk versus reward, it looks like a better bet than relying on carbon-based sources of power.
That's a good one. Sorry.
I think it will be the most politically contentious election since 1968. I truly believe this is a true culture war fight for the soul of the country, and that the forces of power on both sides have so much to lose. It's going to be an all-out slog.
That one turned out very well.
For Republicans.
Right. Now, you're talking about the Democratic convention, not the Republican convention. The Republican convention is going to be all sweetness and light, I gather.
Well, we'll see. Yeah.
And which side do you think the media will be on in this election?
Yeah, I don't think you need my
Same
prediction
side it
on
was
that.
on in '68.
The spirit of 68. All right, Clarence.
I think of 72 as being contentious, although you just didn't have as much tear gas, that's all.
That's right.
But what was our question
Macro
again? Oh, yeah, the
pre-
macro
yeah.
prediction, excuse me. I think Iran is going to be a bigger story than it is at present. It's kind of been relegated to the sidelines. This is like the crisis of back in 2009 when the U.S. had to make some decisions about whether to assist and which side to assist and all. It's going to be very important for the whole
And
region.
it does look like Iran will lash out at some point because their economy is
They're
just
being
such
choked to death.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, my macro prediction, I'm going to go on the China one as well. I think China will be a short to medium term incredible challenge for the United States. In the long term, though, I think because they destroy capital with their state model, they will destroy their economy, and also, more importantly, they will alienate the world with their Belt and Road because of their absent respect for the rule of law and basic contract law. And that eventually will become clear and will upset people. Anyway, on that note, that wonderful note, thank you for watching. Have a happy new year. See you next time.